this urgent webinar on the heartbreaking situation in Gaza. The death toll from Israel's bombardment has exceeded 4,000, of which 1,500 are children. The week began with one of the deadliest attacks in Gaza's history, with the shocking and gruesome bombing of the Church of England's Al-Ahli Arab Hospital, which killed 500 people. As Gazans enter its third agonizing week under Israeli bombardment, the Middle East Monitor, in collaboration with PALMED Europe, have organized this emergency meeting. We will be speaking to world-leading health experts on Gaza, for their clinical assessment of the situation and of the emergency that's unfolding. We'll also be joined by legal experts to discuss the legal implication of Israel's onslaught and the shameful response of our leaders. This week, as you know, the International Center for Justice for Palestinians has written a notice of intention to prosecute UK politicians that are aiding and abetting war crimes in Gaza. So we will hear more about that from our legal experts. We have a esteemed guest lined up. We have Dr. Mads Gilbert, a Norwegian professor and a trauma expert and a veteran of wars in Gaza. We also have Professor Christophe Oberlin, a French surgeon who has worked in the operating rooms in Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza for 20 years. He like Professor Gilbert, he visits Gaza regularly. Then we have Alayyan, a pediatrician who is a deputy cell manager for the Middle East region at Doctors Without Borders. Haydee, Dijkstal, she is external chief counsel for International Center for Justice for Palestinians, a legal expert. She's part of the group that's leading the legal case I just mentioned. And then we also have Sabah Al-Mukhtar. He is the president of the Arab Lawyers Association in the UK. So the format for today, each speaker will speak for 10 to 15 minutes before we give you, the audience, a chance to ask questions. You can watch the seminar through Memo platform, through the Memo website directly, or go to YouTube. For the Q&A, we have a designated website for you to send your questions. So please note this down carefully. If you want to ask questions, the email to send your question is gaza@memonitor.org.uk. So I'll repeat that again, gaza@memonitor.org.uk. And the running order, as I mentioned, will be Dr. Gilbert first, then Christophe, Amber, Haydee, Sabah. I know Haydee has to leave by 8 o'clock, so we'll keep that in mind as we proceed during the evening. But before we begin, I'd like to request Dr. Riyad from PALMED Europe to welcome everyone and say a few opening words. We are doing this as a joint event with PALMED Europe. So Dr. Riyad, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nassim. I would like first to thank all our guests for their attendance in short notice. As we are speaking, things are going too fast behind any words. I cannot find any words to describe what's happening there. I don't think the word massacres, the word crimes, all these terms, I think, are behind. The numbers are raising. I think maybe the numbers you said was just not updated, because at the minute there are 4,137 killed and 13,162 injured. These numbers are horrific numbers in terms of war. And I think, everybody is watching through the media different stories, and there is only one version of story. This is a war crime, clearly. And the reason we held this webinar, we want the people to focus on the medical aspect, because more than 48 doctors killed and 83 from nurses and paramedics. Uncountable number of ambulances. Hospital has been targeted, as you mentioned, Al-Ahli Hospital, and nobody is spared. Religious places, church, mosque, nobody is spared. Nobody is safe in that part. Our message is just, we want this to stop. We want, war is war, but there should be ethics in the war. Nobody should target the kids. Nobody should target the women. Nobody should target the hospitals and medical personnel. And the reason we invited our fellow from, from law firms and this, we want to hear a legal aspect of this, and we want to take a point today, and we want to take, a decision to proceed with a legal aspect to this. We are not living in a jungle. We are living in a modernized war. So we don't want people to be frustrated and thinking that there is no law in this war. I don't want to take much of your time. I want the maximum time for my colleagues who are going to speak. But I just wanted to request every one of you. I know most of our attendants today are medical professionals, and we are working on an international cooperation relief, teams to help. When we said 13,162 to the minute, 70% of them kids and women. These injured people, they are counted to be dead if no medical service is provided to them as quick as possible. For this reason, we are going to make a request, and I hope everybody of you will support this memorandum which we want to write to the Egyptian authorities, to UN, to Red Cross. We want to establish field hospitals, even in Egyptian Rafah, in the cross, to help those people and stop, stop them from dying if we can. I know everybody is standing and watching and just listening to promises and promises to open. So we shouldn't wait for that. If they are serious, they want us to help, just get at least the injured people out to get the treatment. I'll be, delighted to hear any suggestion from anybody on the chat, and we will put the links, later to connect with every medical professional who would like to help in this. Thank you very much for being with us this evening, and really I appreciate your time and your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I just quickly request all the speakers, when they're not speaking, to mute themselves, please? It's for the benefit of our viewers and listeners. So I want to first ask Mads. Thank you for joining us. Mads is in Cairo, Egypt at the moment, waiting to go into Gaza. We spoke to him earlier this week. I had a long conversation with Dr. Mads, and he's been giving daily updates on the situation there. So Mads, over to you. The floor is yours.
Shukran Jasilan Naseem. Salam alaikum everyone. Good evening everyone. I am sorry to open this webinar with extremely worrisome news. Just minutes before we got on air, I got a message from my good colleague in Mustashfa Al-Quds, in the Al-Quds hospital, the Jerusalem hospital in the middle of Gaza city. It is the second largest hospital in Gaza. They have tonight received evacuation orders from the Israeli military. And I will read to you, I have this confirmed from my colleague on call in Al-Quds hospital. The Al-Quds hospital is run by the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, the Palestinian Red Cross. It was bombed in 2014. It has been rebuilt and it is working full time. As of today, they received a threatening message to the hospital director, Dr. Murad. Dr. Murad was told by the general, the Israeli ones, to evacuate immediately all staff and all patients. Dr. Murad reiterated what the leadership in Palestine Red Crescent Society said earlier when they had the first threat. They said the same as the Minister of Health in Gaza said. They refused to evacuate their hospitals and to expose their patients to a secure death if they evacuated. Now, I read to you the urgent appeal that I just received from the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. It reads, Palestine Red Crescent Society has just received a threat from the occupying authorities to bombard Al-Quds Hospital and has demanded the hospital immediate evacuation. The hospital currently accommodates more than 400 patients and approximately 12,000 displaced civilians who sought refuge there as a safe haven, in addition to the medical staff. We call upon the international community to take immediate and urgent action to prevent this disaster. I can add that my colleague, I will not name him, he's an experienced anesthesiologist. He says that we have altogether 100 wounded and then another few hundred patients. It is, of course, impossible to evacuate such a massive hospital building for practical purposes. Number one. Number two, it is absolutely forbidden to threaten, to bomb, and to destroy the function of any civilian hospital. This is, for heaven's sake, it's a civilian Red Cross hospital in the middle of Gaza City, filled with wounded patients needed, you know, ordinary medical treatment for all the diseases that people have. Nobody talks about that during the bombing. And as you heard, 12,000 displaced civilians who have been taken refuge and shelter around the hospitals. We know there are thousands in Mustashfa Al-Shifa. There were hundreds, if not thousands, around Mustashfa Al-Ahli Arab, and the same is for the hospitals in the south. Now, I want to tell you that what has not come up in the news was that Mustashfa Al-Ahli Arab, the Ahli Arab hospital, was actually bombed about 4 days before this last bombardment. And they did sort of puncture bombing around the perimeter of the hospital. Maybe some of you saw the pictures of broken glass and falling down roof ceilings and broken windows. This was a warning. Now, my colleagues in Mustashfa Al-Quds in the Jerusalem hospital in Gaza City told me that they had severe bombing in the perimeter of the Al-Quds hospital 3 nights ago, and this was repeated last night. I feel my voice is shivering because I'm actually thinking that we are about to see another massacre with bombing of a hospital. This Dr. Murad, the hospital director, his interview was right now breaking news on Al Jazeera, and he very calmly described the phone call from this Israeli whatever general or high military rank, actually shouting and screaming to him to evacuate the hospital. As a medical doctor, I've been working in Gaza for 25 years, on and off. I go to Gaza 2 to 3 times a year. I was working in Mustashfa Al-Shifa during the bombardment in 2006. I was there in 2009, 2012, and 2014. I was not let in during the 2021 bombing. We've been waiting here in Cairo now for 10 days to get in. Dr. Erik Fosse and myself, a small team from Norwegian Aid Committee, supported, by the way, financially by the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs. He is here now. He is here now. The Secretary General of the United Nations is here now. He spoke to us all from the Rafah border. My friends, I have a feeling that I feel we don't have time to sit in this meeting because we need to mobilize every possible political energy from governmental levels to all the organizations that are represented here to stop what is about to happen in Gaza City now. I have been double checking and triple checking. I actually received this message from the directors of the Palestine Red Crescent Society. I have it here, if you can see it. It's in English and Arabic. And then I called my colleague, Dr. N. He could not take the phone, and I said, is it true that you have got evacuation order? And he replied, yes. And I said, what is going on? And he says, and I quote from his message on WhatsApp, we are staying in the hospital. There are 100 wounded people hospitalized in the departments and about 5,000 citizens fleeing the bombing. We stay. These are the heroes. These are the brave hearts of the world now. And this doctor is a close friend of mine. I've known him since he was a medical student. He's now one of the most diligent and skilled anesthesiologists in Gaza. He called me 3 days into the carpet bombing. And he said, Dr. Mads, my friend, my family has evacuated to the south. My son is studying medicine in Alexandria. I'm asking you if you can take the parenthood for my son if we are killed. I met his son today. He came from Alexandria to have lunch. It was a very nice lunch. We talked to his father, who is now my source in Al-Quds hospital. This is the situation for the families, for the healthcare, for the patients. There is absolutely no safe space. What the Israelis are able to do is beyond even my most cynical imagination. Ahli Arab, the Orthodox Church, and tonight, Mustashfa Al-Quds. In addition to what my good friend Dr. Riyad said about the numbers, I'm not going to reiterate the numbers, only to say that the last update was 1,524 killed children, 1,000 women killed, 4,000 wounded children, and 3,300 wounded women. On top of that, which has not been talked about, are all the pregnant women in Gaza. Fertility rate in Gaza is, I think, around 4.5 now. There are about 10,000 pregnant women in Gaza currently. And there are, I haven't got it confirmed, but I think around 2,000 to 3,000 in the last trimester about to deliver. They had nowhere to go. And there are thousands of diabetic, young and old, because the prevalence of diabetes is very high. They have no insulin. There is no water to the hospitals in the south. There is limited water, not enough to have pressure on the sterilizers in Shifa, and the medical supplies are running out. 40% only was present on the essential drug list before this attack. And what we see is a massive, illegal, inhuman, and historical nadir of power abuse directed against the Palestinian people in Gaza, and also, of course, in the West Bank, as we hear the killing is mounting there too.
Thank you so much.
But I'm very scared now that what we have heard is a precursor to another hospital bombing.
Thank you, Professor.
And I will try to just put, can I just put that into context? Because the hospitals with the brave hospital staff in Gaza City are now the main hindrance for the carpet bombing and the ground invasion. So I think the Israeli military people are actually stopped by the fact that the hospitals are not evacuated. That's why they did what they did to Ahli Arab. That's the explanation of what's happening tonight. The next one will be Al-Shifa. We have to act now, my friends.
Thank you, Dr. Mads, for sharing this breaking news about the horrific news of evacuation order of Al-Quds Hospital and the pressing need for everyone to act and do whatever they can. Can I press on all the speakers to speak for 15 minutes max, but 10 minutes ideally, because as we want to finish by 8:30. That's the schedule we have ahead of us. I would like to ask now Professor Christophe Oberlin to take the microphone and give us his take.
Thank you, Mads. Thank you, Nassim. It's very difficult to have to think to something after what you have declared, because this is a real emergency, and I will not speak about that. But you have to know that, of course, as everybody, I have a great compassion. Two of my friends, doctors in Gaza, have been killed with a complete family, you know. So all that we know, the horror we know. And as you perfectly said, Mads, what's important, this is to stop the bloodshed. So, excuse me, but I would like to compare the situation in Gaza and in France. You know, if we want to stop the bloodshed, and the Israeli doesn't want to do it, what is possible? This is people from outside who has to push them to stop. And we have to exert a strong action against these people. And to give you the example of France, this is really the shame in our country. And I see around me Palestinian people living to France. And for them, this is the double sentence, because their family are destroyed in the Gaza Strip. And in France, we are unable to speak. Probably you know that France was one of the only countries, Western countries, where demonstrations were forbidden, you know, and we shame about that. I have to read to you the notification given by the French Minister of Justice between brackets. There was a notification, all the court and all the prosecutor in France, and I quote the notification: statements praising the attacks, presenting them as legitimate resistance to Israel, as well as the public dissemination of messages inciting a favorable judgment on Hamas or Islamic Jihad is forbidden, and the sentence could be 5 to 7 years in jail, 5 to 7 years in jail. So really, we are afraid about such governments. Not only we shame, but we are afraid. So what I would like to say, and I hope you will visit me in jail, what I would like to say is that, as I went there for 20 years, 3 times a year, working only with Palestinian surgeons, doctors, nurses in Palestinian public hospitals. And I hear what they say. And I hear what say the people with administration, the Gaza Strip, you know. And for 2006, the people who are administration are people who have an ideology, which is the ideology of Islam. And we have to accept that. When the people in Japan or in India have personal value, history, philosophy, not based on the Western values, philosophy, and so on, we have to respect that. And this is not a reason to bomb them, you know. For the Palestinian people, this is the same. In France, we have a big problem with the racism. Again, all what is similar or assimilated to Islam or Arabic people. The racism in France has reached the summit of the political power, and this is really a shame. When I work in Gaza, the last 14 years, I work with people from Hamas. Do you think that the American could open a hospital in the middle of Paris and not work with Hamas responsible? We work with them, we speak with them, we appreciate them, we appreciate their value, we respect them, and they respect us. So now this is the first time before, after 1948, that there is a real attack from the oppressed people towards the oppriment people. You know, this is the first time. Each time this is the contrary, nobody moves. This is the first time, and in France, they would like we to condemn. I'm sorry, but we have to look after. The French and the Western diplomacy made a very bad action, not accepting the results of the fair elections in 2006. You know, the political, you have a movement of resistance, which is, the name is Hamas. The political track has been closed because no elections. They don't recognize Oslo Agreement, but they accept to run elections. They are democratic people. We have to read their program. They went to the election, they win the election, and now there is no election the last 16 years, you know. So the political issue is completely cut, you know. The second option, this is the legal issue. From Gaza, many complaints. The first complaint was in 2009. They work. And after 5 years of preliminary investigation, the prosecutor in the ICC, Fatou Bensouda, say, I received so many documents with a good legal quality that I opened the full investigation. And she asked the court to confirm. She doesn't need the authorization of the court. She asked the court to confirm. And the court say, okay, we will investigate all the crimes committed by all parties since the mid-June 2014. And after 2 years now, Fatou Bensouda, unfortunately, has finished a mandate. After 2 years, nothing is coming from the new prosecutor. And when we asked him, what happened? He said, oh, I have no money. I have concentrated on Ukraine. I receive a lot of fundings to work on the file on Ukraine. On Palestine is much more difficult. So we have to make a pressure, especially in France or in Western countries, to say, how many fundings do you provide the ICC with to open, to continue to follow the file of Palestine? The prosecutor has all the legal issue to indict Mr. Netanyahu and the main responsible for the current war. So we ask Karim Khan to do his job.
Thank you, Christophe, for providing this analysis and giving us an understanding of some of the racism that's underlying the dehumanization of Palestinians, which again has been used to justify the criminal war crimes that's taking place right now. I want to say to the people that have just joined us, we are joined by Professor Mads Gilbert, Professor Christophe Oberlin, Amber Alayyan, Haydee, Dijkstal, and Sabah Al-Mukhtar. If you want to ask questions to any of our guests, please send us an email to gaza@memonitor.org.uk. If you're watching this webinar via YouTube, you can leave a message on YouTube and my colleagues will pick your questions up and forward it on to me. But if you are watching from the Memo website, so I'll repeat the email again, send the questions to gaza@memonitor.org.uk. I would like to now request Dr. Amber Alayyan to speak. Amber will be here till, as I mentioned at the beginning, 8 o'clock. So if you have a questions for Amber, please email while Amber is speaking. So floor is yours, Amber.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me for this discussion. I wanted to start just by at least explaining what Doctors Without Borders, what MSF has been doing in the West Bank and Gaza, and then to talk about maybe just to give some context, and then to talk about this current situation. So we've been in the Palestinian territories for many decades now. And I don't want to exclude the West Bank from this discussion because things are also, they've been quite bad, as we know, for decades, and they're getting worse by the minute. So just to put in some context in terms of our own activities, we have a program dedicated to mental health that's based in Nablus. We have another program dedicated to mental health in Hebron. And we have a team of people working with a hospital in Jenin for emergency support, where we also provide on mental health support earlier this year during when things got really quite tense in Jenin. In terms of Gaza, we work in Shifa Hospital and in Nasser Hospital in the 2 burn units. In the past, we had, up until last year, actually, we were working on an osteomyelitis program. We had an osteomyelitis surgical program for the victims of the Great March of Return. And we have put in place a bone and tissue lab in Nasser Hospital, the first one to exist in Gaza. And we have, along with these activities, that we've been working in reconstructive surgical activities in the north of Gaza as well. We do physiotherapy, we do mental health, we do health promotion and health education, and we are as well mortified by what is going on in Gaza right now. We have over 200 Palestinian staff with whom we work. We have over 20 expats who are stuck in Gaza, who we are trying to evacuate. We're trying to find protection for our Palestinian staff and to be able to identify safe zones, which I think that the terminology has been deconflicted areas in the past, which in the past had honestly been fairly well respected. And right now we're finding that that is out the window. We're really concerned, obviously, about the population, about our Palestinian staff, and about our expatriate staff. We are continuing to figure out how we can. We've given donations to the Ministry of Health from our own stocks. We basically emptied our stocks to give to the Ministry of Health to help them in Shifa and various hospitals where they've requested support. We no longer have narcotics, and as I said, we've emptied our stocks because we can't refill them. We can't get them in. We have as well been trying to work on what we might do on the Egyptian side, whether it's to be able to provide a field hospital for people who are wounded, or women and children, knowing that this is a fairly sensitive topic, and we're in no way in a position, or do we want to be encouraging forced displacement. For us and for myself personally, first and foremost, I feel like that the international medical community should stand to say that we call for the respect of the sanctity of hospitals and public services, and that we recall international humanitarian law in these cases, that hospitals should not be targets, civilians shouldn't be targets, services for the civilians like water and electricity and food sources should not be targets. So this is overall where we stand in terms of the numbers. I mean, I could echo the exact same numbers that you've been sending, but I am, as Dr. Mads had pointed out, I'm concerned not only about the surgical patients and the trauma patients, but I'm concerned about the pediatric patients, about the primary care level of support, just because we know that in war, and we see this all the time, the eyes are on the wounded, and the eyes are on the quote unquote life-saving procedures, but often the first things to go are primary care and concerns for people with their chronic illnesses. That's not that the concerns are forgotten, but that the people have less access to anything on the level of primary care. And all of these needs are not being met currently, with UNRWA being one of the largest providers of primary care in the Gaza Strip, and their schools are overwhelmed with displaced people. Their supplies will run out as well on the levels of primary care. And as long as there is a closure of the borders and no way to get humanitarian aid in, the situation will just exacerbate. And I feel like that this is where the medical community needs to step in and speak out, that there needs to be a way to get supplies in to Gaza, and a where it's renewable, where we can continue to get supplies in, and we need to be able to respect these zones that should be deconflicted, like hospitals and services for the population. And then if I were to speak outside of that, sorry, he stepped away, but Dr. Oberlin was speaking about just sort of the international community in general. And I think that that's a different subject. I think that, what the world can do is very different from what the medical community can do. And I feel like that very much depends on what people are asking. Speaking for myself and not for MSF, but for myself, we would argue, I'm from the US, half Palestinian, but living from the US. I live in France right now. In the US, if you want to get politically active, you write to your senators, you write to your congressmen, and I feel like that still holds a lot of weight. And I don't know the political systems as well as much in terms of how one gets involved in Europe or in other parts of the world, but I would encourage people to reach out to their representatives. And then in terms of the international community, medical community, as I said, I feel like there needs to be an effort to really speak out and working on all diplomatic fronts, as well as through international medical organizations and societies, to speak out and say that these hospitals need to be protected, and there needs to be the permissions for humanitarian aid to enter Gaza Strip.
Thank you so much. I do have one question that's come to me from the audience. Sorry, because I know you need to leave quite early, Haydee. Sorry, Dr. Amber. The question is, Dr. Amber, yeah. But the thing is, once we get to the other two speakers, I think we'll go way past 8 o'clock, which is why. Ask Dr. Amber about the opinions of MSF and what's happening now. Is there background to this question? I mean, they seem to be saying that there's a conflicting view of MSF as to the regarding the onslaught and your view. So they're ask Dr. Amber about the opinion of MSF in particular about what's happening in Gaza now. Have they issued a statement to say?
Not that I'm aware of. I know that I've just come from a meeting where we've been talking about the constant recognition and the constant calling for the allowance of aid to come in and for the hospitals to not be targeted. We've got quite a lot of history in MSF of our hospitals being targeted, whether in Afghanistan or in Syria or now in Gaza. MSF is unequivocal in its call for hospitals not being used as targets. I don't know if that's what this person is referring to.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Okay. I mean, we'll move on, and we'll turn our attention now to our legal experts. As I mentioned at the beginning, the International Center for Justice for Palestinians wrote recently with a notice of intention to prosecute any UK politicians that are aiding and abetting war crimes in Gaza. I think it's a formula or a process that could be adopted in many other countries in Europe, France and Germany and the US, of course, as well. So to hear more about this, we have Haydee Dijkstal. Haydee is an external chief counsel for International Center for Justice for Palestinians. So tell us more about that, Haydee, and the general legal campaign and where it's headed, and also your comments about the legal aspects of the bombardment and what they mean in terms of international law. What are your opinions and thoughts on that?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak this evening. As you noted, I am instructed by the UK organization International Center for Justice for Palestinians, ICJP. And work has been done this week to raise international criminal responsibility and individual criminal responsibility for crimes that are being committed. Now, as far as our discussion this evening, I was asked to address the topics of international law's protections on attacks on hospitals, medical facilities, against medical doctors, nurses, medical personnel, and also patients. And so I do want to take a moment to address the legal principles under international law for these protections against medical facilities and medical personnel, and then come on to how this is associated with the work that ICJP has done in regards to the ICC individual criminal responsibility and complicity and accessory liability. So I think where I want to start is by raising the attack on Al-Ali Arab Hospital in Gaza City that happened just a few days ago, because there's no doubt that this conversation is integrally related to what has happened there and what we've seen from that. And the reports on the missile strike conveyed the severity and the gravity and the harm caused by the attack. And what I want to first lay out is some particularly strong statements and conclusions and findings from prominent UN experts and UN and human rights experts to what has happened there. So the reports have expressed outrage at the killing of over 470 civilians just in this one attack against a hospital, with many, many more who, in addition to these casualties, are trapped under the rubble. And this statement, which was just issued by a group of UN human rights experts and human rights associated with the UN. So let me just go ahead and list some of them. It's a group of UN special rapporteurs, including the special rapporteur on human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation, the special rapporteur for the Palestinian territories, special rapporteur on violence against women and girls, special rapporteur on human rights of internally displaced persons, special rapporteur on the right to food, the special rapporteur on the right to the highest attainable physical and mental health, to adequate housing, and lastly, the special rapporteur to education. Now, I list all of these special rapporteurs because I think it's very important to show that this group of UN experts have come together and said some very strong things. For example, they called the strike against the hospital an atrocity and went on to also call for the protection of all humanitarian workers after, and I quote, the World Health Organization documented more than 136 attacks on healthcare services in the occupied Palestinian territory, including 59 attacks on the Gaza Strip, which resulted in the death of at least 16 health workers since the beginning of the hostilities on 7th of October. This is not to mention the UN experts' condemnation and expressed outrage at the deadly strike on the same day on an UNRWA school that sheltered some 4,000 displaced people. And the last thing I want to mention about this is most powerfully what these UN experts came to the conclusion of, and they said this: we are sounding the alarm. There is an ongoing campaign by Israel resulting in crimes against humanity in Gaza. And then they went on to say this: there is also a risk of genocide against the Palestinian people. Now, I think that's very important. So not only are UN experts documenting and reporting on these crimes and the severity and the harm that's happening, but they're making these kinds of legal conclusions. So as I said before, I'm instructed as counsel and therefore approach the question of protection of medical facilities, personnel, patients through the lens of the law, and particularly international law. So international human rights law, international criminal law, international humanitarian law. So that's what I want to address as far as the legal principles. In the context of the recent attack on Al-Ali Arab Hospital, it should be understood that international law both puts a positive obligation on states to protect civilians against violations and abuses, while also providing mechanisms for addressing individual criminal responsibility of those most responsible if those abuses are perpetrated. We often think first of the criminal remedy against those who perpetrate the crimes under international criminal law, particularly those provided by the ICC Rome Statute. Here, I'm thinking about the war crime of intentionally directing attacks against buildings, material, medical units, or transport and medical personnel, and that's under Article 8 of the Rome Statute of the ICC. But the foundation to these remedies after the fact can be found in international human rights law as well, which puts a positive obligation on states to protect against abuses and these crimes. And this is both during conflict and in times of peace, and it's key international documents on human rights set out protections for civilians, which emphasize that everyone has the right to a standard of living, adequate health care and well-being, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care. Now, when I speak about governments which have an obligation to protect this right and an obligation not to commit the war crime that I mentioned before, and I speak about this in the situation of Gaza, this includes obligations that lie both with the governments of Palestine, but also with Israel as well. Now, the conflict between Israel and Palestine has been extensively examined under international humanitarian law. And in the context of this area of law, consideration has been given to whether Palestine, and especially Gaza, can be considered to be occupied as determined under international standards, and whether Israel is deemed to be an occupying power. And here I look to the determination of the ICC prosecutor, who found that while Israel maintains that it is no longer occupying Gaza, the relevant view within the international community is that Israel remains an occupying power under international law based on the scope and degree of its control that it has retained over the territory of Gaza. And because of this, the ICC prosecutor has viewed the conflict within the framework of an international armed conflict due to the continuing military occupation. This recognition of Israel's position under international law as an occupying power is critical. Under international humanitarian law, the occupying power is entrusted with heightened responsibilities and duties over the people within the occupied territory, as set out in such international documents like the Hague Regulations and the Geneva Conventions. And this includes that the occupying power must ensure, to the fullest means available, sufficient hygiene, public health standards, medical care. And it also means the use of medical facilities within the occupied territories by the occupying power can only be done with the civilian population's needs taken into account first and foremost. The occupying power must also ensure that its actions are not resulting in collective punishment, which could understandably result in targeting medical facilities. And I think this is exactly, there's these heightened responsibilities by the occupying power to protect facilities for civilians for medical care. And this is where these hospitals come into play. So in short, these are Israel's obligations in regards to medical facilities under international humanitarian law and international human rights law. And when actions are taken that breach these duties, accountability can be sought under international criminal law, particularly at the ICC, as mentioned before. Now, as was mentioned earlier in this call, the International Criminal Court does have jurisdiction over any international crimes set out in the Rome Statute of the court, which occur in the Palestinian occupied territories. And for the court's jurisdiction over Israel, the law is clear. By virtue of Palestine accepting the court's jurisdiction over the Rome Statute and the crimes that are in the Rome Statute and those crimes that happen on its territory, any crime committed by any person, no matter their nationality, falls within the jurisdiction of the court. And I raise this because there is an ongoing argument that Israel is not subject to the jurisdiction of the court, but the law is very clear on this. there is no difference, for example, with someone from Germany or France or Belgium coming to, for example, the UK and committing a crime on UK territory and therefore being subjected to UK criminal laws. The nationality of that person does not remove the ICC's jurisdiction. So this brings me to the issue of complicity, which has been specifically raised by ICJP over the past week. Under Article 25 of the Rome Statute, individual criminal responsibility attaches not only to the direct perpetrator of crimes, but also to those who aid, abet, and otherwise assist in the commission of crimes within the jurisdiction of the ICC. What ICJP has raised is this: with clear information and evidence that international crimes have already been committed against Palestinian civilians since the 7th of October, and also within the context of historical abuses, crimes, and oppression, and also with clear evidence that there is a pattern that will continue in the immediate future that puts the international community on notice that these types of crimes are most likely to occur again. The actions of international leaders, politicians, and other actors is critical. What ICJP has raised is that the prior practice of international criminal tribunals have previously examined the responsibilities of those who have substantially contributed to a crime by providing things like military, financial, but also importantly, encouragement and moral support to the perpetrators of those crimes. And ICJP has put international leaders on notice that such actions can potentially rise to the level of complicity with those crimes. So the ICC role here is critical as we see the situation for civilians in Gaza, and as particularly for medical professionals, patients, and medical facilities as well, as we see the situation deteriorate. And I think this is where the rule of law must be respected, and where the ICC could play a critical role of being an impartial investigator by providing warning, by monitoring the situation, and hopefully by providing deterrence as well to any alleged violations that have been committed under these principles that I have raised here under international humanitarian law, emphasizing in particular the principles of proportionality and distinction, that even when actions are taken in the context of war and here in international armed conflict, no matter the situation, the principles of proportionality and deterrence must be respected. And the ICC should be monitoring this, should provide deterrence, and potentially prosecute as well in the future. So I'll stop there.
Thank you for that, Haydee. Just giving us a summary of the reaction from the major institutions and the warning they have issued over the severity of the crimes being committed, the severity, especially with regards to Al-Ahli Arab Hospital, and clarifying the legal position and whether the ICC has jurisdiction, and also the issue of complicity. We have a lot of questions on the issue of complicity, and we will get to that. But before I do, I want to hand over to Sabah Al-Mukhtar. Sabah is the president of the Arab Lawyers Association UK.
Good evening. It's very difficult to follow the learned lecture which Haydee has given. So I'm not going to repeat what she said, but I will try and touch on some other issues. So even at the risk of stating the obvious, I think it may be helpful if I take a couple of minutes to set the scene. The international law has a number of resources. There are the treaty, the conventions and international conferences. There is customary international law. There are judicial decisions. There is the UN Charter and its resolutions. And there is the international law jurisprudence. These are the sources. Europe, over many centuries, fought wars. And the more recent ones were the First and Second World War. During these wars, millions were killed in Stalingrad, in Dresden, in Hiroshima, just to mention a few. These inhumane atrocities sickened everyone. Hence, the Geneva Convention came into existence in 1949. They were preceded by the Hague Conventions of 1999 and 1907. To touch on the Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols are the international treaties that contain the most important rules limiting the barbarity of war to protect the people. They do not take, so that the war does not be taken to the civilians, the medics, the aid workers, and those who can no longer fight, like the wounded, the sick, and the troops who are imprisoned, they're prisoners of war. The Geneva Conventions, there are 4 Geneva Conventions. The first Geneva Convention, it protects the wounded and sick soldiers on land during war. The second Geneva Convention protects wounded and sick at sea during war. The third convention applies to prisoners of war. And the fourth convention affords protection to civilians, including those who are in occupied territories. So the fourth convention is the one which is relevant under the circumstances. The events of the Second World War showed the disastrous consequences of the absence of convention for the protection of civilians in wartime. The convention, which in 1941, took account of the experience of the World War II. It is composed of 159 articles. It contains a short section concerning the general protection of populations against certain consequences of war. It doesn't address the conduct of the hostilities. This was later examined in what's called the Additional Protocol of 1977. The bulk of the convention deals with the status of civilians in occupied territories, but it applies to civilians in areas of war. It spells out the obligation of the occupying power vis-a-vis the civilian population. And it actually details in the provisions on humanitarian relief for populations in occupied territories and war zones. It has 3 annexes, which contains model agreements, etc. I think I can refer, for instance, to Article 50 of the Convention, which specifically deals with the protection of children. They have to take every precaution to protect the children, not to kill them, not to bomb them. Article 53, it prohibits the destruction of hospitals. The interpretation of this article, if there is a hospital which has military units in it, it cannot be bombed, because this is the protection. So even the idea that it's being, peddled by Israel, that they are using human shield and all this crap, this is nonsense, because the convention is very clear. If a hospital has military units and rocket sites and tanks, it cannot be bombed because this is a destruction which is a prohibited one. Then there is, I'm trying not to get excited. Article 56 of the convention deals with the hygiene and public health. Then if I leave the conventions and I look at the universal nature and underlying the principles of international humanitarian law, this calls for, if you're going to have a war, you must take care of humanity. The second principle is that the military activity must be only the ones that is necessary. Taking military action against a hospital can never be explained as necessary. The third principle is the distinction. If you want to bomb, you have to make a distinction between the people, the civilians, the military, the hospitals, and other things. Then the other principle is the proportionality. You cannot just destroy 25% of the city of Gaza. I've been there a number of times. What Israel is trying to do is to destroy the northern part of the city of Gaza. Probably people don't know that there is a difference between Gaza, the city, and Gaza, the area. Gaza is this city in the north. Israel seems to want, aside from destroying everybody in the south, center, what have you, they want to raise to the ground the northern part of the city of Gaza to make it a no-man land, I think. Now, if we talk about in this way, if Israel is going to kill, now so far they've killed tens of thousands. If they kill another 100,000, if they kill 150,000, if they kill 250,000, what's going to happen of the 2 million? There's still Palestinians who are stuck in the concentration camp that has no equivalent in the world. So what is the world doing about that? It breaks my heart to see the quote unquote civilized world. I came from a backward country. I came originally from Iraq. I've seen the dictatorship of communism. I've seen the dictatorship of the nationalists. And I came to a part of the world which in theory, it epitomizes humanity. And what do I get? President Biden agrees with Israel. Rishi Sunak agrees with Israel. The French president and all the media. And worse still is the role that is not being played by the United Nations and by the ICC. It is a disaster that must be stopped. I know we can talk. I don't think I, as a person, I'm a little bit too old. I don't think I can do very much, but I think it is shame on the humanity that I see a mother holding her dead baby and asking the baby to suckle, and for a father who's carrying a little baby on his shoulder as if he's.
Thank you. Thank you for the reminder why international law exists, its origins, and the barbarity we unleash if the world begins to abandon it or show signs that it's not willing to uphold those values and principles, the kind of crimes that we will open the doors to. As I said, we have lots of questions, especially questions to do with complicity and and hypocrisy, may I say. But I want to begin with a question to doctors who've been to Gaza, who have a first-hand experience of what it's like to be under Israeli bombardment. Dr. Mads, beginning with you. I mean, how would you, there's a question here, and how would you characterize the Israeli government's justifications that they are carrying out precision strikes to minimize civilian casualties? What does that mean? When they even say we are avoiding civilian, targeting civilians, is that really the case on the ground from your experience? How is it like during an Israeli bombardment of Gaza? Because we've been there before, 2014, 2012, 2008-9. We've been there many, many times before. Give us the reality of the horrors that's unleashed on the population in Gaza.
Thank you, Nassim. It's horrifying, full stop. It is horrifying. The sound, the light blasts, the blast wave, the shivering ground, the deafening sound of the detonation, even at some distance. You know, Gaza is extremely narrow. It's 4 kilometers across from the top, and at the bottom it's 12 kilometers. So you can almost see and hear the detonations all over. So the bombing is extremely violent, very intense, and I've always been surprised by the fact that the Israeli generals are bragging that, quote unquote, 90% of our missiles hit the intended target, unquote. They say that all the time. And if you look at the staggering numbers, now if 90% of the intended target, you can do your math. You have 1,524 killed children. 10% of that is 150. So then you have 1,400 intended targets. This is one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that when you're bombing in a population that is denied the right to flee or to have early warning with sirens or to have shelters, like they have all over Israel, by the way, when you bomb that population, which is more densely inhabiting their habitat than Hong Kong and Singapore. And that population has half of its constituency below 18 years. You are bound to injury and kill children. You are bound to hit women and elders. So it's a calculated part of this collective punishment. It even has a name. I researched this when I wrote together with Eric, who is here with me, Fossa. We wrote the book Ice in Gaza. I discovered that there is an academic military university in Israel that research and develop military doctrines. And one of the doctrines is called the Dahya doctrine. Dahya is a suburb in Beirut, from where the Palestinian resistance and also other militant groups have been fighting Israeli occupation forces. And the Dahya doctrine simply is that if anybody or anything is shot at Israeli military units from a neighborhood, from a block, from a village, from a city, that geography will be annihilated. It will be destroyed completely. So the reasoning is that Gaza equals Hamas. The population is responsible. So they are part of what we can bomb, according to the Dahya doctrine, because the rockets are coming from Gaza. It's a sinister, a very dark, and a very, of course, illegal way of reasoning according to international law. But back to your question, Nassim, it is extremely scary. And I've been around. I've been a doctor for 50 years now, and I've been in many different war zones, most of all Gaza, of course, but you never get used to the bombing. You get used to the drones, the Zanani, the humming of the drones in the sky. You get used to some random shots here and there, but this massive carpet bombing, it is unbelievably frightening. And then the houses start tumbling down, And then you get all the earthquake-like injuries, which are crush injuries from the falling concrete blocks and the apartment buildings falling apart. It looks like an earthquake, or Hiroshima. If you look at the drone pictures of Gaza today, you have the crushed muscles, you have the fractures, you have the multiple injuries, lots of complications. And you get the other main type, which are the shrapnel injuries from the fragments and the bullets penetrating the skin, your whatever clothes you have, goes into the tissue, into the cavities, the skull, the chest, and the abdomen, and cause bleedings. And then you have the burns. The burns are always extremely prevalent. So your question, I don't know how to answer it. And I'm sorry to say that while you were discussing, I received a new message, which is from the Israeli army. And it says, warning, residents of Gaza City and all its neighborhoods, the IDF has pleaded with several times to evacuate to the south of the Gaza Strip, including the shelters and schools. You have not done so. Next paragraph. To all people staying in at the northern Rimal area, especially those in the following schools: Rimal Prep, Tal El Halwa Prep Elementary Boys School A and B, Bahlin Elementary School A and B, Tal El Halwa Elementary School Girls A and B, Tal El Hawa Prep Girls. We emphasize again that the IDF is operating in the area against Hamas. Staying in the schools and shelters may not be safe. You must immediately, capital, leave the shelters and the schools and move to the south of the Gaza Strip, south of the Wadi Gaza. So they're now ordering 3 large UN schools full of thousands of children, women, civilians to go out in the dark night of Gaza because they're going to bomb. You know, this is not going to be amended with more doctors or nice Norwegian rescue operations or Médecins Sans Frontières or whoever. This is going to be amended by political pressure to stop this massive punishment of the civilian population and this genocide in the making, which is the unfortunate headline of tonight's discussion, and which is being so heavily confirmed with the threat to evacuate Mustashfa Al-Quds and the 3 UNRWA schools. And I just got a message from my colleague in the Jerusalem hospital, and he says, we have decided, it's very short, he says, we made a decision that we will not leave patients behind. Full stop. There we have it tonight.
Yes, desperate situation. I want to ask a question to separate question to Christophe. Well, kind of related as well. That's been sent to me. How to do with complicity? How does the international community's inaction and complicity contribute to the suffering in occupied Palestine? So I think another way to put it, this is me phrasing this, I think we've heard of cost-free occupation. That's what we've seen over the many decades. Are we now seeing cost-free massacres? I know it's a controversial thing to say, but you spoke, Christophe, about the changing in the cultural mindset in France and Europe. We spoke earlier. And there is a shift taking place culturally and politically with regards to Palestine. Do you think people are realizing that there's a huge cost to the inaction and the complicity? Seeing that the massacre and the barbarism that takes place when European leaders, France, UK, Germany, fail to speak out against that. Christophe? Oh, turn your microphone on. Christophe, turn your microphone on. It's not on. One second.
It's okay.
Now. That's
it's okay.
Yes.
Yes. You speak about the question is, if I understood well, this is about the complicity of the foreign country, especially Europe and political leaders, isn't it?
Yes, and how that contributes to their suffering.
Yes. I feel a very, very clear mechanism to that. As the people in Western countries, the political responsible doesn't want to face with the Palestinian leaders they are built with Oslo procedure. They have built a sort of NGO, or I don't think so. I don't know how to call it, but a sort of object, legal object, which has no definition, which is the Palestinian Authority. And now, after so many years, they see the failure of that, but they don't accept the self-determination. They don't accept that the people, they vote for people, and these people will be the head of the people and will give their opinion. So we have to recall that Palestine does exist for 3,000 years. The modern state of Palestine does exist since the dismantlement of the Ottoman Empire as a state. It was legally a state with a territory, boundaries, a legal system, stamp, passport, and so on. Palestine, the state of Palestine before the Second World War, was able to deal with international agreements with many countries, including the United Kingdom. It was a state like Syria or Iraq and Jordan and so on. Since 1948, the state of Palestine is at war. The state of Palestine is at war. Since the decision of the court and the prosecutor of the Al-Sisi, the 5th February 2021, the state of Palestine is a part of the ICC, is a part of the ICC with the same obligation and the same capacity, okay? There is a state. So the legal problem now, this is between the state of Palestine and the ICC, and there is no NGOs. The time of the NGOs is over, and we have not to speak, to discuss. We are not lawyers specialized if that is a crime or not. There are crimes. War crimes have been committed for so long time, including the recent events. And the work of the ICC is to investigate all crimes committed by everybody. If there is a bomb on Al-Shifa Hospital, samples have been harvested. You know what? The Palestinians, they have a very, very good forensic team for harvesting proofs and so on. And this is why this very good forensic team has worked very hard, that for the question of the march of return, 3,000 files have been sent to the ICC in the proper form, and they have been accepted. And Fatou Bensouda, so I was overwhelmed with very good quality legal proof. So the question is not now we have to inform the public, but the legal question now, this is the discussion between the state of Palestine. So this is the reason why the Western countries, they don't want the Palestinians to have representative people. They don't want to have election, and they say Hamas is the evil, but no one is knowing what is Hamas. This is a political party. The political party asked for elections. He won the last election, and this is the reason why the Western country want to destroy the Gaza Strip.
Mads, I can see you have your hand up, but before I come to you, because we have a lot of medical questions, and I want to direct that to you afterwards, but we are on this legal matter. I was wondering if Haydee wants to come in, or Sabah, and also address a question related to that, which is, given the obvious reluctance of the ICC prosecutor, Karim, to investigate as he did in Ukraine, what is the way forward? We mentioned the ICC, and the question originally is about complicity and reluctance to prosecute and that impact it has on the Palestinians. So before we go into the other medical questions, do you want to respond to that, Haydee, and Sabah? Feel free to come in as well.
Well, thank you for that question. As I did mention when I was giving my remarks, the role of the ICC here is critical. It has jurisdiction over crimes that are committed, and it is imperative that the ICC use this jurisdiction that it is empowered with in order to fully investigate, to impartially, independently, to be that role as that impartial and independent investigator, to look into all crimes that are committed, all evidence, all information that is committed, and also for organizations and for groups that are working on this matter to make sure that the ICC prosecutor is receiving this information and receives those requests, that everything is examined with a view towards potential prosecutions in the future. As far as the reluctance, to the question about reluctance, how I'd like to respond to that is by saying this: there is an open investigation at the ICC. Which does mean that the ICC prosecutor is actively reviewing all information and evidence that comes for the prosecutor. And the more evidence of these crimes that are submitted to the ICC that demonstrate the overwhelming pattern, the systematic and widespread nature of these crimes and how they are all related and compound upon each other, I think the more it becomes undeniable that action needs to be taken. So that's how I would respond to that question.
Thank you. Sabah, you want to come in?
Thank you. I agree fully with what Haydee said, but there are other political means. For instance, I would have thought that the Arab countries and the Muslim countries would seek an order from the General Assembly of the United Nations, where the UK and the US have no veto, to ask the International Court of the Criminal Court to act. I would have thought that some of the members who are in the Security Council, like the UAE and I don't know, some of the Arab countries out there, they should have done that. I think the Arab countries, and I'm now, this is not, I'm not passing the buck, because these are the weaker link in the international scene. I cannot compare the UAE with the United States of America, but it is still a voice. I think those countries that still have embassies with Israeli embassies, I'm not asking them to close it yet, but if they have the guts to just call the ambassador and tell him to tell their governments that if this continues in Gaza, we will reconsider the position. That would scare the US itself, because I think the US is more concerned with having an agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia than between Israel and the Palestinians.
So a question related to something we've been watching on social media quite a lot. I know you want to come in, Matt, so add your comment to the response here. I'll come to you in a second, Haydee. I've got quite a few questions on the medical side of things, and these are really important questions to address. So Christophe, Matt, both feel free to come in response to these questions. So as I was saying, we saw videos of shell-shocked children, and it's really heart-wrenching watching children, young boys, girls, shaking. So what about the future of these shell-shocked toddlers? What help would they need in the future to live normal lives? Another one is, we've seen Palestinians always come together, in times of difficulties and challenges. From your experience, Mads, Christophe, on the ground, can you tell us the atmosphere of what it's like in the hospitals at a time of Israeli bombardment? The question is comparing that to the UK when we had COVID and people were really jumping over each other to fight over toilet rolls. That's the kind of scenario you have here over COVID. So what's the scenario like in Gaza and Gaza hospitals during such bombardment? So do you want to start, Mats, and then Christophe, and then we can move on afterwards?
Can I just make a very brief comment on the discussion on legality and the language?
Sure.
Language is incredibly important. I always conclude my lectures on Gaza and Palestine with saying, this is not a difficult conflict. This is a difficult occupation, because the word conflict is confusing people. It's like two people quarreling about something. This is a completely illegal occupation that has lasted for 75 years, or for, whatever, however you start the counting. And as the ambassador to UN from Palestine said after the last UN Security Council meeting, he said, this did not start last Saturday when the first Israeli got killed. This started 75 years ago, number one. Number two, I think this is a little bit the same as we saw with a final struggle on Algeria against the French colonialism. I consider the struggle that we are watching live now as one of Western colonialism's last convulsions, actually. The core problem, the root problem, is an occupation based on colonial settler politics with a deep element of racism and apartheid. You cannot solve that with some discussions or a two-state solution or some medical relief efforts. This must be solved by solving the root cause, and that is bloody. To your question, the kids, yes, they are scared, but they don't need busloads or truckloads or airplanes full of Western, white, blue-eyed psychologists and psychiatrists. They need their families, number one. They need to be in their culture, in the neighborhood of adults who can look after them and comfort them and sing for them and give them food. They need to be in the extended Palestinian family. Of course, the most important thing is to stop the bombing and to stop the attacks on the civilians. But that said, there is a bundle of new research, in particular from Guido Varonesa and his team, showing that the resilience and the post-traumatic growth in Palestinian children, in particular in Gaza, is very strong. It's not like half of them or 90% are having shell shock or PTSD. A minority is having that, as long as society is intact around them. The family, the big family, can take care of them. Language, culture, faith, Palestine, food, all these things that makes the kids secure. And that's why the current situation is so horrible, because now they're chasing the families out of the habitat, out of the secure place, which is the home, and the neighbors, and the school, and the kindergarten. These are the networks that keep kids resilient and strong, even in the face of extreme hardship. If you have these things intact, you can have phenomenous post-traumatic growth. And it's also shown in research that the bigger struggle, the struggle for the country, for Palestine, is also an important factor to protect the kids from long-lasting negative effects. Of course, there is a lot of negative effects, but I've been trained in European school medicine. We always look for failure, for what's not working, for what is the weakness. If you start looking at the resources, the mastering, the resilience, you get a totally different picture. Now, how is it in the hospitals when there is bombing? It's hard work. It is relentless hard work around the clock. There is laughter, there is companionship, there is a black humor, which we survive on. I've been, as I said, a doctor for 50 years in emergency medicine. What we survive on is the comradeship between us, the nurses, the doctors, the janitors, whoever. We hold each other. We give each other a clap on the back. We give each other a fag or a cup of coffee, and we talk. And we see patients survive. And the other side is that we get incredibly exhausted. We have no more energy. We need support. We need solidarity. I'm sitting here in Cairo not because I think that the Palestinian doctors and nurses cannot do the job. They are the best. But I sit here because I know that they need shoulders to lean on and people to come and say, you are not alone. We have not forgotten you. We stand tall with you, the Palestinians in Gaza now. And we shall never, ever turn our backs to you. That's what is needed. Thank you.
Christophe?
Yes, I fully agree with all what Matt said, and there are two things I would like to outline. The first is I come back to Hamas. I'm really sorry. I have not to be sorry because nobody in the media mentioned the political program of Hamas. The last 20 years, I met so many high-level political leaders of Hamas. all they say the same. We have nothing against the Jews. We have against the Zionists. Our program is first to have a Palestinian state in West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, with a complete ceasefire and a truce, 10 years, 15 years, 25 years. Do you think that if there is a truce tomorrow and for 25 years, they will not be able to solve the problem after 25 years? And Fatou Bensouda said, we accept Palestine as a state, whatever the future of the borders, and these borders have to be decided by self-determination of the Palestinian people, including everybody. This is the program of Hamas, and this is the political group the Western countries would like to eradicate. That means 50% of the electors are prepared, more or less, to vote Hamas. So you want to kill 50% of the Palestinian population. This is what is saying our government and the Western government in general. So the program of Hamas is never explained, nowhere. And Sabah Al-Mukhtar came back, and I completely feel your emotion. The second problem is the second subject Mads mentioned. This is the subject of the children. I have treated and operated and examined so many hundreds, thousands of children. And I completely agree with you. They have a capacity of resistance, which is absolutely incredible. I remember a publication by Riyad Serraj, who was a very well-known Palestinian psychiatrist, and in a review of 4,000 children, 40% have seen from their hair the cadaver of a Palestinian person killed in front of his house. So we have the hope with these children. I have seen, as everybody here, very emotional video. I remember a poor guy who was the age of my grandchildren, explaining, I am alive or not. He was unable to say if he has died or if he was alive. And other videos I have seen, children, as we see during the bombings, even during the bombings, during a moment of quiet moment, playing and smiling, playing football in the street. I remember I was during the war in 2008-2009, and between the bombings, they were joking and playing in the street, you know. This is the Palestinian children.
Thank you, Christophe. Haydee, I think you wanted to say something at the beginning. I know it was a while back before Mads spoke, and Christophe, did you want to say anything?
I could say it now, or I can incorporate it.
No, incorporate it. Just say it now if you want.
Okay, sure. I just wanted to come back to the point about the ICC.
Sure.
And, it was carrying on from what Sabah said about state parties. When the war in Ukraine and Russia's invasion of Ukraine happened, what we saw immediately was 40 plus countries, signatories to the Rome Statute, that came together and immediately referred the situation of what was happening and the crimes that were being committed to the ICC prosecutor. Now, there are some legal points on that, that was technically needed in order to move the situation from a preliminary examination to the official investigation stage, and that helped usher that situation into that official investigation stage in regards to Ukraine. But the point taken here is that state parties to the Rome Statute came together and immediately referred those crimes. And when we talk about groups that can submit evidence and information of crimes to the ICC prosecutor, we should not forget about those state parties who have themselves signed up to the Rome Statute, have been subjected themselves to the jurisdiction of the ICC and accepted that they will protect against the crimes that are listed in the Rome Statute, that when they see crimes happening in other jurisdictions, that they will also similarly raise them before the ICC prosecutor and ask that the prosecutor investigate them and potentially prosecute those crimes.
Okay, Sabah, I know you want to get in, but we are out of time. So what I want to do is I want to ask everyone one final question. I don't want to. I know it's tragic and the situation is dire. Despite the context, I see moments of resilience, not just in Palestine, of course, that's always the case, but here in the UK and Europe and around the world generally, something seems to have shifted. If you see the number of protests and the sheer volume of numbers of protesters in UK, in France is prohibited, but still people are coming out in their huge numbers. And I want to share this a stat with everyone here. There was a YouGov poll that was done just recently. There's been a lot of conversation about this, especially on the right wing of the media. So this is the support of the public for Palestinians and Israelis. Generally, all Brits support for Israel is 21%, Palestine is 17%. And that support is more within the Tory supporters and way less within Labour voters. So Labour voters' support for Israel generally is 9%, and Palestine is 27%. So that shows that there's a huge disconnect between Labour leadership and its members and its supporters. But this is the striking figure. Between the numbers for 18 to 24-year-olds, support for Israel in the UK is only 11%, and support for Palestine is 39%. And that's the number that's caused huge, I would say, unrest amongst right-wing commentaries. What's happening to the UK, they're asking. And this number I could extrapolate, and and this is something that's happening in the US, across Europe, where you're seeing a huge shift, especially in the context of this conflict. And that, for me, is a sign of something to be really happy about. There's a huge awareness that's taking place, and it's heartening to see the level of support Palestine is getting. So to end on this note, I want to just quickly get your thoughts on that. And is there something you've seen in Palestine, in the solidarity that's been shown in the West? Is there something that's giving you cause to be optimistic with regards to what's happening in around the world? So if I can begin with anyone, Sabah, do you want to start? Can you just give us your quick thoughts on that?
Last Saturday. I'm going tomorrow on the Saturday. I've been on Wednesday in front of Downing Street. I've seen so many people who have now begun to understand. That is not attributable to the ordinary thing. It is to the heinous crimes that are being committed. And people are decent. Everybody in the world are decent, even in Israel. When they see such atrocities, they cannot just, the politicians may be quiet. I think our Home Secretary, she issued a crazy letter, which is contrary to the constitutional arrangement. She has no authority over the police, but she issued instructions. She issued instructions what slogans not to be said. She issued instructions banning the carrying of the Palestinian flag. 100,000 people carried the Palestinian flags, used all the slogans that she said you cannot use. And you would have thought that, I understand she would be upset, she would be unhappy, but for the Home Secretary to actually sink to the level of issuing what do they call it, Twitter, saying, you people who went on the march, you wait for the police are going to knock your door. Now, this is You can have it from a human being, an ordinary person, but not the Home Secretary. This is when you get angry at somebody, you say, I will call the police. What is this? Is this how the governments and the politicians are working? And I think the gap between the politicians and the people is widening.
Christophe?
Oh, I have nothing to add. What Sabah Al-Mukhtar said, it was perfect. I would like only to mention a small thing. There is a Kofi Annan told once that the ICC will reach the highest credibility at the time the main political power will be a part of the ICC. And he was speaking about different countries, especially the United States. And I completely disagree with that. The United Nations will reach the highest power the day America is going to the ICC. It's not the credibility of the ICC which is in cause. This is the credibility of the United Nations. And maybe you remember that South Africa has been expelled from United Nations at the time of apartheid. And after, when the apartheid failed, the South America has been accepted again. You know, it was a short period of time. And if there was a vote tomorrow of the General Assembly of the United Nations, there is absolutely no doubt that Israel will be excluded. The 70%, 75% of the nations represented in the General Assembly of the United Nations were formerly colonialized. You know, there was colonies, so they think about that. They have that in the brain. So the General Assembly, this is more than a poll, you know. This is General Assembly is represented 190 states in the world, you know. But the problem is that such a vote can occur only after the proposal of the Security Council. There is no vote of the General Assembly to exclude anybody if the Security Council doesn't ask to make the vote. So this is the particular part of the settlement of the United Nations which has to be changed.
Haydee, before I go to Mads, I want to close. I'll give Mads the last word. So Haydee, do you want to say anything? Say something? Yes.
I think when we're reflecting on our discussion this evening and everything that has happened, a cause for optimism would be in the renewed interest and acceptance about the importance and the relevancy of international law in everything that has happened, and that it is that international law must be followed in everything that is happening. You know, I spoke about the principles of proportionality and distinction that must guide every action of each party in what happens going forward. And I think to echo what Matt said before, the law is clear, the law is straightforward. And what I'm seeing optimism in is, while we are organizations like ICJP are warning politicians and leaders against statements that might endorse or provide encouragement or support or contribute to crimes, we are also seeing more and more statements and findings and conclusions from the UN and other bodies that are demanding that these principles of law are followed. And I do hope that we see more of that as well.
Mads, you have the final word. Mads, can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I've been a little bit on and off because it's happening a lot of things. I think we're seeing a new division. I wish I could say that I had the same optimism as Haydee with regards to respecting international law. But if you look at distinction, precaution, proportionality, I mean, Israel has been violating that since 2006, at least, in Gaza. You had the Goldstone report, you had the report after the 2014. Israelis, you know, just refused to let any investigative team in, just throw it away. And I mean, the evidence was so overwhelmingly clear in the Goldstone report and in the report after 2014. So as long as the US and Israel are not members of ICC, good that Palestine is it. I think we need much more popular pressure to hold the US accountable. And we need, of course, to look to the global South. There is no international community anymore. I heard a speaker from Amman this afternoon from the demonstrations there. He said, forget about the international community. It's the West, EU and the US, Canada, and then it is the global South. And that division is very clear on Palestine and on the analysis, the demonstrations, and the way people behave in the UN. So as I say, this is not a difficult conflict. This is a difficult occupation. It is maybe the last settler colonial project for the West. Israel is a colony for the West in the Middle East, and it will take years, but it will find another political solution. I want justice. I want peace. I am against all types of terror against civilians.
I think we've lost connection. Yes, we have lost connection, Mads.
I'm sorry. Can I say the last words?
Yeah, go on, go for it. So
yeah,
you want justice, you want peace, say, go on, carry on.
Yeah, line is falling down all the time here in Cairo. But I think we need to rely on the popular movements and on the good people's heartfelt solidarity, and the knowledge of what is right and wrong does not come from power. It comes from moral thinking, discussions, and debates among ordinary people. The abuse of power comes as no surprise, and justice that does not come out of power. So I think I'm optimistic, absolutely, and I think the people of Gaza, the people of Palestine, is showing us a great example, because they do not accept to be stepped on. They do not accept to maintain occupied, colonized, and on a racist structural violence. They say no, whether it is by just being Palestinian or whether it is to take part in the resistance. So I think what's happening right tonight, as I've told you, the occupier threatening the hospitals and the people of the refugee schools to leave. They don't leave, they stay. And I just got this video, which is from the inside of Al-Quds hospital tonight. And you can see it's absolutely
shocking pictures.
This is the hospital which is doing what good politicians and government should do. Look after, shelter, protect the civilians. They do that. And I just got a two-liner from my colleague, the doctor. He said, we have discussed, we are not leaving our patients behind. If anything happens to these precious people during this dark night from the Israelis, it may be the end game. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we'll end on that rallying call, Mads. Thank you for that. I want to thank Haydee, Dr. Mads, Christophe, Amber, and Sabah for joining us. Really appreciate your time. We've overrun. We're supposed to be here for an hour and a half. We've been doing this for nearly 2 hours. And thank you for your patience, and you at home for tuning in. Thank you for your patience. Stay safe, everyone, and see you soon. Bye-bye.